Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. A headline in the New York Times blares, "A once proud industry fends off extinction. The industry in peril, classical music. Record sales are down, ticket prices are up. Symphony orchestras are in trouble. Do Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart have a future?" Keith Lockhart, the conductor of the Boston Pops Orchestra, says yes. The question before this house: can classical music come back? This week on Think Tank. Across America, classical music is in an apparent slump. Record sales are falling from 7% of the music market in 1987 to 3% in 1996. Keith Lockhart is waging a one-man campaign to revive interest in classical music. In 1995, he took up the baton as conductor of the Boston Pops Orchestra. During his first 2 seasons, he conducted more than 100 concerts and recorded the album Running Wild. Keith Lockhart and the Boston Pops Orchestra play Glenn Miller, which features Pops arrangements of big band music and a dozen full-page photos of Keith Lockhart, all suitable for framing. Keith Lockhart, welcome to Think Tank.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here.
Why is classical music in trouble?
Well, I think it's, to paraphrase someone, I think the rumors of our death are greatly over-exaggerated. I'd certainly like to think so. I guess I've staked a lot on that premise. It's become, I think, fashionable, and I think somewhat troubling and annoying to those of us in the profession to proclaim the death and demise, to point out the problem without the coincident responsibility of pointing out the solution. I hardly think I'm waging a one-man war, buddy. I think there are a few people who are interested in this. I think the problem is very real. The problem is that we have, at least what those of us in the musical business think is one of the great traditions of our civilization, one of the great expressions of mankind's ability to say something significant, to say something that will last through the ages. And we have an audience that appears at least to be becoming a more and more stratified, small, elite, the charge of elitism is leveled a lot at the business, subgroup of the culture and basically broken off from mainstream culture.
Is classical music an acquired taste?
No, I think one of the problems that we face is that there's this myth surrounding classical music. Somebody called it the cult of profundity. That is that somehow you need some special credentials, a secret handshake, a PhD in musicology, whatever, to go into a concert hall and enjoy a piece of classical music and performance. And I think that's really wrong. I think it's a really specious argument. I think the amazing thing about music, what makes it worth pursuing and preserving and encouraging, is that it has an across-the-board ability to reach deep into people and touch them viscerally, emotionally, without that sort of pre-knowledge and appreciation. And of course, it's like anything else that's worth learning about. The more you know about it, the greater and deeper your understanding is. But at the point that Beethoven was premiering his symphonies, a composer would have been booed off the stage if they brought the same stuff that they had done last year. This was horrible. If you were creative, people went to concerts to be challenged, to hear something new and different, and to react to it.
To hear good old Ludwig's newest work.
Exactly, right. And that's not necessarily to say to hear it so they could throw roses either. To hear it and vociferously debate its merits or lack thereof, to get into fights.
The way we would do with a play or a movie today.
Exactly.
Where does the this pops come in? Why don't you give us the short history of pops?
Well, the thumbnail sketch is that the concept of a pops orchestra or a distinctly pops repertoire is fairly much an American invention. There certainly are the connections to European traditions, the beer garden sort of orchestras in Germany, the Brahms concerts in England, the existence of light operetta, opera comique in other places in Europe. But the pops, as that under that sobriquet, comes from Boston 111 years ago, when Henry Lee Higginson, the man who founded the Boston Symphony, saw a need to provide a couple of things. Number one, to provide music for an audience that he perceived was not coming in and taking advantage of the Boston Symphony's more regular classical subscription type offerings, and also to provide work for his musicians through the summer months at a point when there were no orchestras in this country that were full-time. The great thing about the Boston Pops as it's evolved, quickly continuing that thumbnail sketch, it's 111 years old, but there have only been 3 conductors in the last 67 years. Arthur Fiedler took up 49 of those years, and
he started at your age.
He started at the age of 35 in 1930, and really created or recreated the pops in his image. The thing that we think of as the Boston Pops today is largely a creation of Arthur Fiedler's vision. And Arthur Fiedler was really a musical populist at a point that that wasn't necessarily an admirable thing to be in the classical music industry. Now everybody has jumped upon that bandwagon, but way back in 1928, a couple years before he got the Pops job, he founded the tradition of concerts on the Esplanade, the outdoor space by the Charles River in Boston. He actually started this partly for a selfish reason, because he wanted to gain the attention of the Boston Symphony trustees who kept passing him over as conductor of the Boston Pops. But it was also, I think, a very firmly held belief that there was a need for what he, as he termed it, a public library for music, a way of disseminating music at a time when the recording industry was in its infancy, to a large group of people who would never set foot in Symphony Hall.
When did the John Philip Sousa stuff come in?
In Fiedler's first...
The marches, which I love.
In Fiedler's first concert with the Boston Pops, he ended his program with Stars and Stripes Forever. He ended up ending almost every program he ever conducted with Stars and Stripes Forever. And he knew what was crowd pleasing, but he also had a very good ear and eye for what was good and what was lasting. By the way, we're celebrating a big birthday this year. The Stars and Stripes Forever, the manuscript is dated Christmas '96.
Oh, really?
So it was finished just slightly over 100 years ago. So it's going to be, it's a piece you have to think that if people think of the Boston Pops as an orchestra, that piece comes to mind faster than just about any other piece. And it is the world's greatest march. Mm-hmm. I don't care how many times we play it, it's still a great march.
You pretty well have to play it every time you do a Pops concert.
There are some concerts where I would fear an angry mob if I didn't do it. I have the one time I did a concert not with Boston prior to that time, where I ended a concert, decided, Sousa was the march king. He wrote a lot of wonderful, stirring marches that are really part of what has become the body of American classical repertoire. And I said, I'm going to do a couple of other ones. So I ended the concert, instead of giving them Stars and Stripes Forever, I ended the concert with Hands Across the Sea and El Capitan. And an older lady came up to me at the end and said, "But young man, why didn't you play the Sousa March?" And I said, "Well, excuse me, ma'am, I played 2 Sousa Marches." And she said, "Young man, you didn't play the Sousa March."
There's, I guess by now, a famous paragraph in a Wall Street Journal article that dealt with your efforts and the situation of classical music, which I would like to read, which you may have memorized by now, which is Mr. Lockhart, who counts P.T. Barnum among his role models, has made concert entrances on rollerblades, in a Batman suit, on an elephant, and from a Dracula coffin. Introducing Beethoven at casual concerts, he says, he invokes, quotes, everything from Jack Kerouac to Beavis and Butthead to convey the composer's rebellious side, and so on and so forth. Is that A, accurate, and B, fair?
This article was, I felt, a little bit sandbagged by, because basically it was obvious, though it was not obvious in any of my conversations with the person, that what they were trying to do is come up with a black versus white, black and white sort of situation, where on one hand you had the keepers of the flame sitting in an ivory tower and saying, what these people are doing is desecration of what we've worked so hard to preserve. And on the other hand, changing anybody who has made any effort to push beyond that envelope at all into some sort of rebel without a cause, resorting to flat-out gimmickry in order to attract an audience. The funny thing about most of those aforementioned entrances is that, for one thing, they were all in the context of children's concerts. What gets lost in the shuffle is that they were integrated into the context of what, at least I hope, was a really effective and stirring program that is still lingering in the imaginations of the 6- and 7-year-olds who were seeing them.
But you have been criticized also, and I guess a number of other people in the industry have as well, as sort of engendering a cult of personality. I think that was one of the phrases I read. And in point of fact, your first CD with the Boston Pops, They're Running Wild with Glenn Miller, which I just listened to yesterday. It was really a terrific album, I must say. But it's about a 24-page liner note, one of those little booklets, of which I think a dozen pages are full-page photos of you in sort of jogging shorts and sneakers, prancing around.
Believe me, I've seen it.
Yeah, no, what do you, I assume that's on purpose. I mean,
well, I
have some control of it as the artist.
Some control, yes. I mean, I think what we're dealing with there, frankly, I'm about as not into, personality salesmanship as I could possibly be. And that may come as a surprise to people who have looked through that album booklet. Frankly, my view of marketing, just like my view of extra musical things that go on in concert settings, is you need to not be afraid to use the tools that are available to you, the weapons, if you will, that are available to you to create a niche and give people the opportunity to hear what it is that you have.
If you're serious about something, you ought to be prepared to promote it.
Right, and we're so in this business. One of the things that we've, I think, been late in getting on the bus for is going out there and taking off the white gloves and being willing to fight in a society that is incredibly marketing driven with other more easily chewable forms of entertainment.
Could you, for our viewers, perhaps list out, I don't know, 4 or 5 of the things you like most and think they would like most at a Pops concert?
Well, let me see. The great thing about a Pops concert situation is the fact that simply it's not as formulaic as a traditional symphony concert. It's not overture, concerto, symphony. Where else can you hear a concert, as we just did on tour, for instance, where on the first half of the concert you have music of Charles Ives, the rather thorny and difficult, but also really American composer of the early part of this century. And on the second half, you have, at the end, just for fun, a tribute to Elvis that has the entire audience standing up and singing "Can't Help Falling in Love with You." It's that sense of fun and a refreshing, unbuttoned sort of approach to music. But in the context of the concerts we do day in, day out in Symphony Hall in Boston, we have done so much music that is really some of the best music that we have to offer people. We've done music and not always safe stuff, not like, well, they've all heard the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth, so we can do that. We've done music of Stravinsky and of Maurice Ravel and of Bartók, who did the finale of his Concerto for Orchestra, the aforementioned last piece in the standard repertoire, which was written for the Boston Symphony, so there was an interesting resonance there. We do full Mozart piano concertos in the context of these concerts, and this is what we call a pops concert.
We talked at the very beginning. You said that you want to try to remedy this situation of sort of stagnation in the classical music industry. Let's talk policy for a moment. I gather you are a major supporter of the idea of federal funding for the arts.
I think the single most important reason to have a government which publicly supports the arts is probably a different reason than a lot of people, a lot of the audience would think. It's the amount of government funding for the arts in this country has always been a drop in the bucket of the total picture of what it costs to produce this.
No, until the 1960s, it wasn't even a drop in the bucket.
Yes, it wasn't out there at all until
we went almost 200 years without it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anyway.
And then it was,
right.
But I think the larger reason for it being there is the danger in removing that is the public, is the fact that the government sees it as a national priority to have a vibrant and living arts culture. It's a leadership thing more than...
It was you, not me, who used the term elite regarding symphony orchestra audiences. What is the justification for taking tax money from a truck driver who is making $35,000 a year so that you can subsidize the ticket for a putatively elite concert goer, so that instead of paying $80 a ticket, he'll only have to pay $70 a ticket, and the person being subsidized may be making several $100,000 a year. Now, what is the political morality of that?
Well, of course, what I said was that there was a perception of elitism. I think that the problem with that is that simply that the charge of elitism is a self-fulfilling one. The less the government has a role that I think in a way creates a greater egalitarian sort of look to the arts, simply because it allows us to do the other things. You're right. If government funding was cut out completely and ticket prices went up to 100 or representative of what it cost to actually put the event on, a few major orchestras would survive, and they would become once again the toy of the affluent. We would have no ability to do educational concerts. We would have no ability to support music in the public schools. We would have no ability to do outreach. We wouldn't even have an ability to do a week of free concerts on the Esplanade anymore, because we would have to become victims of having to go to the troughs that support us.
But why should classical be supported and not, say, country music? I mean, if I were a country music artist, why wouldn't I say, why is he getting the bucks?
Well, part of that is pragmatic. Part of that is because country music turns a profit, makes quite a big profit actually, and it's interestingly enough, I think you'd find a lot of country artists who would be first on the bandwagon in supporting.
Or substitute the Smashing Pumpkins and Nine Inch Nail or whatever. Well, why subsidize classical? What is so unique about it that we have to pump tax dollars into it?
Well, I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this. It's similar to why should we subsidize libraries when People magazine is so readily available? Why should we support quality education and access to the great books and the great thoughts of this civilization when there's so much pop culture readily available for free? Or why shouldn't we be supporting what goes on MTV as well? I think classical music, like great art, great thought, great books, is it goes beyond being just an entertainment. It is an entertainment, but it goes beyond that to being an expression of what we are and what we can be, and it needs to be understood that these sorts of things are treasures that are not recoverable. They're not popular fads. They won't be here one day and gone the next. They are great traditions that when we lose the strain of, we lose part of who we are.
Is it possible, I'm partly playing devil's advocate here, but is it possible that governmental funding for your kind of work tends to be stultifying in itself? If there were no government support, you would have to submit your music, as you do partly in any event, certainly on the pop side, to a market test. And wouldn't that sort of drive you in exactly the direction you want to go, as expressed in this interview, that you want to make it more accessible, you want to make it more popular? That's what a market does.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're absolutely right. And one of the best wake-up calls that we have had is a drop-off of significant portions of our funding. It is true, certainly looking at Europe as a model. European governments in general have a much more significant portion of their budget associated with the support of these institutions. Therefore, we have the perception in this country that Europeans are somehow far more involved with the arts, that every concert there is sold out, that the man in the street knows four Bruckner symphonies by heart, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, it may be true indeed that there is a resonance into that culture that's deeper than here, but in general, these organizations have been resting on their laurels and their government subsidies for years. They play to half houses. It doesn't greatly affect them because that's not where any of their income to any significant extent is coming. As a result, they've been, in these last few years, as the governments there have been no longer able to support at the same level that they were, they've been in far more trouble than American arts organizations simply because they weren't used to fighting for themselves at all. They don't do outreach, they don't do educational concerts, they don't try to excite young audiences' minds to this, to create a future audience base 20 years down the road, because they never had to. And so, in a way, the fact
because of the government support,
yes, right? Because they've always had it too easy. And you're right, that causes the danger of that sort of support, of blind, across the board support, is that it causes a lack of responsiveness, and that it causes people to, organizations to say, well, why shouldn't we just not reevaluate what we do? Why shouldn't we just do the same old thing that we're comfortable with? And I think the truth and the ideal opportunity lies somewhere in the middle of those things. I think, yes, the government should say to its people, just as it says education is a priority in this country, I think it should say the arts and the humanities are part of this nation's education, and they are important enough that we are going to go on the record as supporting this.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, it's been great.
And thank you. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
We at Think Tank depend on your views to make our show better. Please send your questions and comments to New River Media, 1150 17th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036, or email us at thinktank@pbs.org. To learn more about Think Tank, visit PBS online at www.pbs.org.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.